Science is the great antidote to the poison of enthusiasm and superstition. The first thing you have to know is yourself. A man who knows himself can step outside himself and watch his own reactions like an observer. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their advantages. Never complain of that of which it is at all times in your power to rid yourself. Mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent. The man whose whole life is spent in performing a few simple operations, of which the effects are perhaps always the same, or very nearly the same, has no occasion to exert his understanding or to exercise his invention in finding out expedients for removing difficulties which never occur. He naturally loses, therefore, the habit of such exertion, and generally becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. No society can surely be flourishing and happy of which by far the greater part of the numbers are poor and miserable. In regards to the price of commodities, the rise of wages operates as simple interest does, the rise of profit operates like compound interest. Our merchants and masters complain much of the bad effects of high wages in raising the price and lessening the sale of goods. They say nothing concerning the bad effects of high profits. They are silent with regard to the pernicious effects of their own gains. They complain only of those of other people. People of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion, but the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public, or in some contrivance to raise prices. It is not very unreasonable that the rich should contribute to the public expense, not only in proportion to their revenue, but something more than in that proportion. Virtue is more to be feared than vice, because its excesses are not subject to the regulation of conscience. Wherever there is great property there is great inequality. For one very rich man there must be at least 500 poor, and the affluence of the few supposes the indigence of the many. The affluence of the rich excites the indignation of the poor, who are often both driven by want, and prompted by envy, to invade his possessions. Individual ambition serves the common good. Wherever there is great property, there is great inequality. All for ourselves, and nothing for other people, seems, in every age of the world, to have been the vile maxim of the masters of mankind. Every man lives by exchanging. Man is an animal that makes bargains, no other animal does this, no dog exchanges bones with another. How selfish soever man may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in his nature, which interest him in the fortune of others, and render their happiness necessary to him, though he derives nothing from it, except the pleasure of seeing it. Problems worthy of attacks, prove their worth by hitting back. The learned ignore the evidence of their senses to preserve the coherence of the ideas of their imagination. The interest of businessmen is always in some respects different from, and even opposite to, that of the public. The proposal of any new law or regulation of commerce which comes from this order, ought never to be adopted, till after having been long and carefully examined, with the most suspicious attention. It comes from an order of men, who have generally an interest to deceive and even oppress the public. The man of system, on the contrary, is apt to be very wise in his own conceit, and is often so enamored with the supposed beauty of his own ideal plan of government, that he cannot suffer the smallest deviation from any part of it. He goes on to establish it completely and in all its parts, without any regard either to the great interests, or to the strong prejudices which may oppose it. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. though our brother is upon the rack, as long as we ourselves are at ease, our senses will never inform us of what he suffers. They never did and never can carry us beyond our own persons, and it is by the imagination only that we form any conception of what are his sensations, his agonies. When they are thus brought home to ourselves, when we have this adopted and made them our own, begin at last to affect us, and we then tremble and shudder at the thought of what he feels. The statesman who should attempt to direct private people in what manner they ought to employ their capitals would not only load himself with most unnecessary attention but assume an authority which could safely be trusted to no council and senate whatever, and which would nowhere be so dangerous as in the hands of men who have folly and presumption enough to fancy himself fit to exercise it. What is prudence in the conduct of every private family can scarce be folly in that of a great kingdom. How selfish soever man may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in his nature, which interest him in the fortune of others, and render their happiness necessary to him, though he derives nothing from it except the pleasure of seeing it. The value of any commodity, therefore, to the person who possesses it, and who means not to use or consume it himself, but to exchange it for other commodities, is equal to the quantity of labor which it enables him to purchase or command. Labor, therefore, is the real measure of the exchangeable value of all commodities. The real price of everything, what everything really costs to the man who wants to acquire it, is the toil and trouble of acquiring it. The subjects of every state ought to contribute towards the support of the government, as nearly as possible, in proportion to their respective abilities. Man naturally desires, not only to be loved, but to be lovely. There is no art which one government sooner learns of another than that of draining money from the pockets of the people. Civil government, so far as it is instituted for the security of property, is in reality instituted for the defense of the rich against the poor, or of those who have some property against those who have none at all. We are but one of the multitude, in no respect better than any other in it. The poor man's son, whom heaven has in its anger visited with ambition, goes beyond admiration of palaces to envy. He labors all his life to outdo his competitors, only to find the end that the rich are no happier than the poor in the things that really matter. Consumption is the sole end and purpose of all production. Hatred and anger are the greatest poison to the happiness of a good mind.